Good afternoon, everyone. I can just see everyone kind of trickling in. We're going to give it about another minute or two before we start the presentation. All right. I think we have a good amount of members in this room already. So we'll get started for the afternoon. We'll just let the other ones trickle in as we go through the presentation. I just want to say good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first member Q&A webinar session of 2023. Last year, we hosted a similar monthly Q&A session with members. If you were part of those sessions last year, then welcome back. And for those who are joining us for the first time, this is our first informational webinar session. So I'll be providing a quick deal introductory presentation. Then we will open up the floor for a Q&A. So at that time, all attendees are able to unmute themselves and kind of just have those questions or concerns or share your experience with current dedicated locator model right now. So feel free, go ahead and share those questions, thoughts, and concerns, experiences through the new legal dedicated locator model. House rules, obviously, if you're not speaking during those times, just ensure that you have yourself muted to give the opportunity for everyone else to kind of speak clearly in terms of their questions. Just to go through here today is our goal is that in this session is to spark communication between members and ourselves regarding the new DL model as we continue to the transition industry wide. I see a lot of familiar names in this attendee list, so a lot of these things now that we are working with you guys directly now. So feel free to share your experience with currently what's happening on your end or any concerns that you may have. So we'll go through these sessions here. So in today's introductory session, I'm going to take you through the new legal concept of dedicated locator, what it is, and what we are currently seeing in the industry. So we'll start off with what is the dedicated locator? A dedicated locator is a single locating resource that is used to mark all infrastructure, all underground infrastructure within a project area. This has an exclusion of transmission hydro, transmission pipeline, MTO, and other underground infrastructure not registered through Ontario One Call. With the current standard process, you submit a locator request through Ontario One Call, and each underground infrastructure owner that are affected would be notified through Ontario One Call. Now, depending on the area, a Locate Alliance Consortium LSP may have 2 or 4 of those utility to locate, but others will have their own individual locators coming out to complete the locate. This is where we see the inconsistency and the constant struggle of project owners trying to obtain full valid locates. to start their work, to schedule their work, or even have continuous work. The time frame of the locate completion between each utility really differs, even though the locate validity have changed to 60 days. We still often see a lot of projects calling multiple locates or relocates every 2 or 3 weeks in hopes of fulfilling a full complete locate package. This can really bog down the public load and the members' resources to keep up with the project demands. So in dedicated locator, there is a single resource that is funded by the project owner, working constantly within the project area under their schedule when and where it's required. So Dedicator is really beneficial for a couple of different scenarios. We have three over here. First scenario we're looking at here is long-term projects lasting from several months or even years in duration. With continuous long-term work, there will be constant locates, relocates to manage timelines between individual utilities where we often see these fall out of alignment and take a large amount of resources from both the excavator and the members to manage and keep up the project on time. On a large scale project, similar thing, on a large scale project, there's a large amount of locates, relocates that are required to cover the project scope, putting in a lot of pressure on both ends once again, and bogging down the overall locate request system, where as in dedicated locator, you would not have to rely on someone else's resources or the members' resources to go out and complete the locate. The project owner will be using their own resources through the dedicated locate service provider. Now, with also in the last point here is that projects with complex requirements. A lot of projects nowadays, it's not a linear project where they're going to standard linear process where they're going from point A to point B and then jumping into point E and F, where most projects aren't necessarily always progressing in a linear fashion, but instead they're jumping around in multiple sections of the project as required, where with the dedicated locator, you can work hand in hand and have them provide that flexibility where you need them to work and work ahead of your crew. Now with this, let's think about safety as well. Because we're providing beneficial here for locate delivery, but essentially we're looking at as well too is safety. Obviously safety and dig safe practices. In many cases, what dedicated locator can provide in the current public system right now, how many times do we have project owners request to the members for paint refresh or help clarify discrepancy in the locate on site? Public locators are required to answer emergencies or attend other locates. Therefore, there are times in this scenario that projects proceed with excavation and end up damaging the infrastructure because of maybe poor paint or they didn't fulfill the discrepancy that they have on hand there. Now, with a dedicated locator, that dedicated locator is on standby or directly working with the project. So that project owner has that flexibility to call upon the dedicated locator to come on site to refresh the paint without submitting relocates or help clarify discrepancy as they're not relying on the members' resources at this point. So kind of just going through the previous slide here, we're just going to expand more in terms of the benefits of dedicated locator. In terms of the benefits, I have mentioned a few on the previous slide here, but ultimately, one thing that the excavation community has been after for a number of years now is control over locating side of things. Do we all agree with that, right? Now, obviously, the control from the excavator and the project side of things can put a strain to the member side, right? With dedicated locator in place, as a project owner, they can now manage and have that control, right? It means that they can control when and where and how they want the dedicated locator goes and complete those locates. On retrospect, as an underground infrastructure owner, you're not having to send your own resources to complete the locate multiple times trying to meet the demand of the project, relieving some strain on the public load. With control, they are able to manage the dedicated locator to work ahead of their crews, not having to wait for a locator for paint refresh or travel times as they are readily available within the project area. This helps, keeping the project on time and the flexibility of the project going forward, right? With that, they certainly reduce and completely remove equipment and worker downtime and costs of helping them deliver the project on time and on budget. Now, in retrospect, we can look at that as well too. On the member side, they're taking away that strain off the members' resources, because it's taken on to the project owner side of things now with dedicated locator. Now in this slide here, in the next few slides here, we just want to go through what we're currently seeing in the dedicated locator and by the numbers. On the just wanted to show you on the dark green line here is the last year's number of locate requests that are under the dedicated locator model. We started in May when Bill 93 received royal assent and became part of our act. Now, prior to Bill 93, there was a version of dedicated locator, but it was very manual. No one was compelled to take part in the agreement. So there were a lot of these setups where other members would voluntarily take part of it and others would not. So you can see, the timeline again did not necessarily match up. With the new legal concept of dedicated locator, we've seen that clarified a little bit, and certainly a number of the telecom industries are the ones really taking advantage of this today. As we move towards the end of the year, we saw a slight dip in the numbers, which is common in seasonal dip, but we see in a yearly. But what I want to emphasize here is that dip was a lot less shallow than the public stream. This tells us that projects under dedicated locator model are continuing, year round. So there's not really a stop on their end. They're taking advantage of what they have on site there as dedicated locator, and they're continuing working year round long. We got to look at it in a safety aspect as well too. Your infrastructure is being marked, being painted, and ensuring that it has clear visibility for that project owner to work year round long. In January, we want to look at the graph here on the orange line. In January, we recorded more dedicated locator requests than any other months of last year. Bear in mind, this is obviously not a peak month of your typical excavation activities, but we can see that project owners are preparing and getting ahead to start up on the peaks for their peak season, right? So once again, when project owners are going under dedicated locator model, they're continuing working year round long, taking that strain away from the member itself. So that way they're working. So we continue and by the numbers here. We compile the data here in terms of numbers that we are seeing right now from March 2022 to, from May 2022 to March 2023 existingly right now. We have listed the top 10 dedicated locator project owners that we have seen and the amount of locate requests that we've seen in our system. So topping the list here, we can see our Bell Canada topping the list with Rogers as well too, and Enbridge. So what we're seeing here is a lot of those broadband projects are utilizing the dedicated locator system and using that for their purposes of for their fiber to home builds, ensuring that they are having their project on time. Going back with the numbers here, now we're splitting this up with this data to where we see the most active deal regions. So topping the numbers here, we have York region, Durham, Peel, and Ottawa, and Simcoe region topping the most numbers that we are seeing that are under the dedicated locator models that are being used within those locations. So it's good to see where these concentrated dedicated locates programs or project owners are using or utilizing the program itself. Now in this slide here, we just want to go through the base level dedicated locator requirements from all stakeholders involved in dedicated locator, right? We want to look at to start off with as project owners. Now this is a member Q&A session, but obviously a lot of the members on board also in this call are wearing two hats. So they are the member and they can be also the project owner. Like on previous slides, we have multiple members that are having their projects that are going under dedicated locator, right? So this is one thing to look at is as project owner, you are responsible to submit a 90-day notice form to Ontario One Call. Now we do have those forms available to our webpage, or you can reach over to our team and we can walk you through how to properly submit this notification form to Ontario One Call to formalize your dedicated locate project. A contract, you can the other portion here for project owners that to contract an approved dedicated locate service provider. Obviously, in this case, is that for a dedicated locate service provider, there has to be a base level requirement for a dedicated locate service provider. We're not just allowing that to any service provider out there with minimal experience that just opened up last week as a locator. There is a base level requirements that we've set out with the working committee of dedicated locator working committee that to meet the standards for them to become a dedicated locator service provider. And we are working with yourself as well too as members to how we can approve these dedicated locate service provider in your base requirements to locate your infrastructure safely. And then from there, a project owner would notify Ontario One Call when the project is complete. This is very important. Obviously, we want to limit the project to ensure that this program is only used for the specific of that project, nothing else outside of their work scope, nothing else outside of their timeline. Once the project is completed, we remove access to the actual program itself for that particular dedicated locate program, so that way it doesn't take advantage of the system itself. Now, under the Ontario One Call, our team here for the dedicated locator team, our responsibility and requirements here is to identify the members in the vicinity of the work described. We notify the affected members of the proposed DL project. We are the liaison to the project owners, members, and the DLSP. So we're here to work with all stakeholders to ensure that we are properly rolling out dedicated locator all across the industry here, and we are all aligned together to ensure success of this program. Now, with the members here, the responsibilities for and requirements for the members is to comply with the ONUS Act, agree upon the selected DLSP, and then provide the infrastructure records mapping within the 10 business days. Ensure mapping is up to date. Obviously, that's one thing we need to ensure. One thing you want to look at as a member is that you are providing your mapping information to a third-party service provider. So, how does that look like on your end? Are you comfortable enough to your existing mapping to provide that to a third-party locate service provider to complete the locates on your behalf for that project? Now, the last thing here is we're looking at the dedicated locate service provider, where the dedicated locator service provider, their responsibility and requirements here is once they have established that agreement with, obviously a project owner and the members, they would reach out to the members to identify, the project limit, to obtain the mapping for that particular project limit. And then from there, once they have all the required standards mapping and an escalation process through that members within those work area, they can go ahead and complete the locate for the project within 10 business days or as per instructed time frame of the project owner. So just wanted to give everyone an update here in this call to what we're currently seeing out there in terms of project update. On the left-hand side, we are seeing it's currently what's happening. These are projects that we are seeing that are active or existingly into our dedicated locator model. We can see several members that are in these calls right now that are currently active with us under the dedicated locator model and utilizing that. We have also seen a lot of municipalities jumping on board under, utilizing the dedicated locator model as for their capital projects. So that's one new thing that we are seeing as a trend, starting off with City of London, City of Burlington, and then Regional Peel taking advantage, utilizing the model itself. Imminent, we are looking at, we are having close conversation with ZIO projects coming up and upcoming City of Ottawa, Eastlink Hydro One, Metrolink. So these are all open conversations that we are constantly having with these project owners and setting them up and getting them on board under the dedicated locator. So with dedicated locator, we have established two different type of projects. And these are the projects you may see that's coming into a submission to your side of things in terms of member. So we just want to lay this out and just ensure that everyone's well educated in this call, that we have two type of project that we accept under a dedicated locator project. First is the standard DL project, which is a dig project on a single defined work area that does not extend outside of the prescribed limit. So it's just a single work scope in a long stretch of a singular stretch of road that's continuous. So for example, transit projects, road rehab, dig projects where it's on a singular continuous stretch of road and it doesn't extend anywhere outside of that specific limit itself. So that could be one standard dig project under a dedicated locator where we would establish the members that are affected only within that scope of limit. Now there's the other as well too, where we are seeing this utilized most is the DL regional project, where there are multiple dig projects within multiple work areas that extends throughout the prescribed region. So a lot of the fiber to home projects or municipal capital projects are actually utilizing this program. This enables them to give greater flexibility to work within a region for multiple dig projects that they have that's occurring at that point, right? So fiber to homes, it's not in a concentrated area. they would have separate work areas that they'll be working through an entire region or regions, crossing across multiple regions, where we can accept that through and provide that information from the initial acknowledgement of submitting of the project itself. So that's all I have for in terms of the introductory presentation for today. We do have a follow-up session on May 10th where we would go more in depth in terms of the process of dedicated locator. So this is where we go with the nitty-gritty stuff of how the process would look like when we're receiving the request, how it's going to look like on the member side. So if you haven't signed up for those ones, just ensure you sign up for it. Just want to leave this on the board here before I open up the floor. Our dedicated locator team is growing. We are growing along with the industry itself. So it is led by Adam Mordaught, our Director of Member Services, and myself here as a supervisor of the dedicated locator. And we also have Alex, Brandon, and Christine as our dedicated locator coordinators. So at this time here, I just want to open up the floor. I'm going to give the capability to, for your side of things there, to unmute yourself and open up the floor for questions. So like I said in the beginning of this presentation here, this is an informal session, so we're all here to gather to share your experiences, your concerns, any questions you may have regarding the dedicated locator model in terms of introductory itself. So I'll leave up the floor now. Yeah. If you have any questions, feel free to go ahead with those questions. We also have a question box there. If you're not able to speak, just put in your question there and one of our team will get around to it.
Hi, Marco. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Is this Doug?
Yeah, this is Doug from T-Baytel in Thunder Bay.
How's it going, Doug?
Oh, it's going good. Very good. I'm very looking forward to this dedicated locator system. But I have one question on the regional dedicated locator. Mm-hmm. So if we get an application for a company to do a vast area, like Northern Ontario basically is the last one I got. Mm-hmm. Fiber to the home. The company wants to use a dedicated locator for basically Sudbury to Manitoba. Mm-hmm. For fiber to the home projects. How do I respond to that?
So we got to look at it in terms of timeline wise. What is the project timeline? Whether or not they're going to be there within the year, and we can actually try to work with the project owner and kind of minimize that, right? Because a lot of these regional requests is that they're expanding certain region because it's still considered as one big project, right? Yeah. In terms of these project owners, in terms of their planning, that's considered as one big project. So if it's this fiber to home is expanding multiple region, they would have to provide that through. But as a member, yes, I understand it's covering such a large scale, but this is where that flexibility comes across, where you can still work with the project owner, a DLSP, to kind of put that priority where will you guys be working in the next 30 days, 90 days, 120 days, so that way we can kind of work with you hand in hand to how we can provide the mapping from that point in, or if you have, depending how your access is to your mapping or your agreement with them, you can open up for the entire region. But
wouldn't that be up to the dedicated locator to give us 10 days notice as to where this one utility or this one project is happening? Like why should I have to reach the?
It's not. It's basically what's happening is that we are when we receive those project requests, if an expanding multiple region, we are providing a member list that are affected throughout all those regions, and we're providing a member acknowledgement to those members. Now, yes, you're right. The dedicated local service provider project owner will reach out to you and saying, we are going to be mobilizing in these areas. We require your mapping and standards and whatever training you require for us to locate on your behalf. But whether or not, how does that look like on your end if you're able to provide that coverage all the way across? Or if you're required to provide them in bulks. So like this is where I said that as a member, you can work hand in hand with the project owner or the DLSP at that point, as long as you have that open conversation to start off with within that 10 business day that you're agreeing with this. But we need to figure out where your work scope is and occurring within the 30 days, the 90 days, or 120 days. And this is something that they can work on a schedule with you, right? So that's yeah. So like I said, it's something that I've been proactively saying to a lot of members. It's not black and white once you receive that notice. there is that availability where we provide you that contact information to the project owner and the DLSP where you can have those conversations. You can have those conversations with us. We can be in a touch point meetings with between all parties to ensure that we are utilizing this program itself and everyone's on a line to to get this going.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Good afternoon. Doug Merkelly here with 407 ETR. This may have been already answered. I was a little late to the call, but is anything being done to provide more information on the notices for the dedicated locator project acknowledgement? We get some of these by email, and it's typically the 2-page or 3-page document, and it's all in text. So we do not subscribe to the dedicated locator program. We take care of our own fiber and we locate our own fiber. And for the most part, we'll either just send a one-liner to the email, saying that we're not participating. And although we go through one call, we have our own private electrical contractor who does our locates. But I mean, some more information on these forms would be helpful. A lot of times it'll say, DL Zone 5, and
Okay.
Initial
So,
cities, Saga, Brampton, something along those lines. So I think
let me
more info is kind of needed.
Yeah, so let me clarify this, Dragon. When you receive the notification from our DL team here, you're receiving them through a text format only. There's no attachment of the project notice that is attached by the
We
project.
get an attachment, regional notice, but it's all text. Like there's no, so I'm looking at most recent one that I got here from project owner would be Bell, ProMark, the dedicated locator,
Mhm.
but there's no actual information on where that project is.
Is it on a PDF form or are you actually just seeing it as a text? That's where I'm
It's
a bit confused.
PDF form, sorry, PDF form.
Okay, so the PDF form, it's text indicating where, the information of the project owner, the DLSP. You scroll down the second page, they may have, the project scope area. Some may have mapping, some may not. Now, this is where, as a member, and to start off with, to answer your second questions there, there are, with the new Bill 93, with the Royal Assent and the new legal model of dedicated locator, there is a legal requirement now for a member under a dedicated locator. So if you're receiving this acknowledgement, there are legal requirements on your end to be in compliance under the dedicated locator. So you can't just not participate at this point. We have to look at it to are you affected within this project? Is your infrastructure within this project? If it is, then how do we proceed forward being under this model, right?
So that's what I'm there's no way for me to really know if I am affected, right? There's no drawings. It's like, a lot of them will say various residential areas through the city limits, right?
Yeah, so
that could be anywhere.
And I understand, and in those cases, like I said, the project owner information is on with it that attached, or the dedicated local service provider information is on that attached. And usually, when we send out these project acknowledgement, either the project owner or the DLSP would be reaching out to the member itself, requesting and obtaining the information that's required at this point within, within the compliance of the act, the onus act itself within the 10 days. So the dedicated local service provider will initiate that contact with you to say, we are coming into your area, please provide mapping and whatnot. If you require further further details of the project, this is something that you can have that conversation with the project owner, because you're right, you might not be affected. There could be some fiber to home, but they're not going through, the 407 property itself and whatnot. So it could be as a simple contact with that project owner or with that DLSP to determine where these projects are, where these project scope is. Yes, it's a regional format, but if it's not reaching or touching your infrastructure, or their limits is not within it, then you can provide them saying that you're not, your infrastructure is not within the limits of this. Therefore, you can be cleared off this model itself.
Okay, understood. Thanks.
Okay.
Eric, Kelly Krause calling from TELUS.
Yes. Hi.
Yeah, I have a question about emergency locates. Is it do the project owners have to notify Ontario One Call when there's an emergency, and how's the dedicated locator work on that
So with emergency, it's still considered as an emergency. If there is an emergency on site that has to go through, it still goes through the standard process. It doesn't apply through dedicated locator at the moment. So, like I said, if there's like an emergency that has occurred, if there's a damage that have occurred, I have to call in for an emergency locate, it still goes through the standard process, not through the dedicated locator.
Okay, a second question I have real quick is,
Mhm.
now if a company's working on a project that's say a year long, are they
Mhm.
required to notify the utility owners in a 90 days or 120 days that they're still working on site and that they will be maintaining that work site for
Yeah,
another additional 90 days, for example?
that's correct. So what we do here as Ontario One Call, we work hand in hand with the project owners to do checkpoints every 90 days. Um, every 90 days, we do check if the work is still occurring or if the work scope has expanded, any changes within the project scope from the initial submission 90 days prior. If any of those changes has occurred, we also check the member affected list within those project areas. Any of those changes, let's say an added member has been added on, we would send out a notification to that. So yes, the acknowledgement is shared between, first off, obviously from Tier 1 call to the project owner and the project owner as well too. This is something you can work hand in hand with the project owner or DLSP to give you those notices that they're still maintaining their work area there. And from our end here, from when the project is done, we do require them to provide us notice when the project is expiring or completed, because we do remove those access or the setup that we have created for this purpose at that point.
So they are required like for TELUS, it's every 90 days. So they are required to contact us every 90 days to tell us that they're still working near our
So
infrastructure.
under the legislation, there's no direct requirements,
So how
but
do we
it's
know?
it's something that you can stipulate that onto your agreement with the DLSP.
Okay.
Yeah, so each individual member, obviously, it is recommended to go into agreement with the locate service provider that's servicing that project owner. So those are the things that you can individually stipulate onto your agreement, that you need to provide an update every 90 days in terms of records, training, whatever is required on this upkeeping of this project, and just that acknowledgement itself.
Shouldn't something like that be dictated by Ontario One Call? I mean, they have their hand in everything, and they're controlling how this is all done. Shouldn't
Mhm.
Ontario One Call be saying, "Hey, you guys are required every 90 days to contact the utility owners and tell them exactly what you're doing, and if
We
you're
are doing
scope of
that
your
direct.
project, how long it is." Sorry, I'm
Yeah.
not sorry, I wasn't finished. Sorry.
No,
How
no
long the
worries.
project's going to continue on for? Like,
Yeah.
shouldn't the project owners be conveying that information to you guys, and then you
Yes.
guys conveying it to us?
So our involvement is directly to the project owner. So we check up on the project owner, ensuring that the project are still ongoing and whatnot during those times. And like I said, if any changes has occurred onto the project, we notify all members involved. But in terms of if the project is continuous and is still ongoing every 90 days, then that's something that could be worked between yourself or the project owner, DLSP at that point, to give you that update. But our update is ensuring that the project is up and running still with the project owner on our end. If no changes has occurred, then there's no further notification. We only provide the notification on our end if there's added members or if there's changes on the limits of the project, and that's where we send out the notices to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Neha Kanjar from the Region of Peel.
Yeah, I can hear you, but it's very lightly. I think you're on a speaker right now.
Is that better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay. Do have a question. We have received several emails from DL at Ontario One Call.
Mhm.
And then we've also received a couple of separate inquiries. So initially when reading some of these emails, I was under the impression that we get notification from Ontario One Call indicating that,
A project.
whichever company or the project has entered into a DL agreement, and they're giving us notification, and then each of those individual projects would contact us to, enter into the agreement and start that process. Is that not the case? Like, are we supposed to be going back on each DL email, contacting the project to, figure out whether we're part of it or not? Or are they supposed to be sort of approaching us?
It goes both ways. So the initial acknowledgement comes from Ontario One Call. Obviously,
Okay. Yep.
we that is the official acknowledgement. So that 10-day, as per the legislation or the act, starts off when we send you out that member acknowledgement email where we say we provide the notice form that's provided by the project owner, and we say this is the project that's occurring to your area. This is the project owner. This is the DLSP. So that's the initial official communication that comes from Ontario One Call. Now afterwards of that, the usually in most cases that we are seeing is that the DLSP, in some cases the project owner will take the from that we'll take that and reach over to the member to open up that conversation. So
Okay.
that's the reason why you're getting a separate notice right after that, because that's them reaching over to you saying, Ontario One already provided the acknowledgement. Here we are now, you know, to start off the conversation to have with you guys to how we can proceed forward under the dedicated locator model. So that's the reason why you may see multiple notification. Our dealing here is just notifying you that there's a project on hand. And within that notice, you'll see that information of the project owner and the DLSP. And then from that point in, they will be reaching out to you or vice versa. If you haven't heard back from them and it's coming into that 10-day or within that 10-day, reach over to them. You have that contact information within that notice.
Okay. Yeah, I have many that are well past 10 days, and that 10-day window is kind of difficult to. Is it 10 days just for acknowledgement or to have everything set up?
So it's the way that it's very difficult. I quite understand it. As an industry wide, it's to say it is a very tight timeline on
Yeah.
that. Right? It was
I
written
mean,
very,
for legal agreements at a
yes.
municipality,
It's
I'm
something
waiting
that
like 2 years for certain agreements, just to let
it,
you
it,
know.
it's something that the bill itself, the way it was written, it's possibly envisioned for a year or two, that's possibly a possible timeline. But as
Okay.
we go through it
It's
as
not
an
realistic.
industry, yeah, as we go through it now, a year down the road, as an industry wide, we are better prepared in some ways. So timelines are getting shorter and shorter. What we just
Okay.
encourage within that 10-day is just that acknowledgement. Okay, so that
Okay.
acknowledgement, you get that email from us, that acknowledgement comes in from the dedicated local service or project owner. As long as there's communication occurring between that within the 10 days, then you're in compliance at that point. There's
Okay.
some cases where yes, the mapping, providing the mapping or the agreement can take a separate timeline, as long as it's within reason, and also within agreement with the project owner of an alternative timeline, then an alternative timeline can be agreed upon. So you're
Okay.
still in compliance in a way. So like I said, as long as there's a
So I have
communication.
not, yeah, and I have
Yeah.
not acknowledged some of these, so I'm not in compliance right now, is what you're
Mhm.
saying. But at the same time, if the project owner hasn't contacted me, are they not in, like, I don't understand. Should
Yeah,
they not also reach out?
yeah, this is definitely something that we are promotedly
Okay.
advising to all.
Okay.
So obviously there's a lot of I guess in terms
Gray
of
areas.
yeah. So we are working with all parties, hence the reason why we have
Okay.
all these Q and A's. So from your side of things, maybe have those reach out again,
Yeah.
and perhaps send us an information on our end. If you have not heard back from any project owner from our acknowledgement after the 10 days, give us an email, send us a notice that you have not heard back from them, and then from there we can follow up as well too. So you can utilize our team for those purposes as well too.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem.
Hey, Marco, it's Jeff here from Zayo. I got my hand up, but I guess it's just
Yeah.
a free for all, or are we going through the? I've been
Well,
waiting, but it looks like we're not going to get to it if we don't just chime in. So
no worries, just
tell me
speak
if
out.
I need to wait in queue or to go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay, I just got two questions, and maybe it's the next session. First one is, it says the dedicated locator, we're supposed to agree on a locator,
Mhm.
but I'm getting these things already with a locator identified and just asking us to sign up.
Mhm.
So what if we don't want to use any of those locators? I don't want to have 50 locators touching my network. What if I have a locator that I want to use exclusively for Zayo for these purposes? How does that work?
So in that point, there's legal requirements for a dedicated locator, right? Understandable. There's a lot of members that are very sensitive to having only a specific requirement for for have their own locate service provider. But under the dedicated locator new model, there is that legal requirement. So the base level requirements for these dedicated locators, they're at standards at this point. So in this case, as a member, you would have to seek out to the project owner to start off with to their choosing of their dedicated locator. Obviously, like what I said in my presentation, there's a base level standard to that. It's not just a random locator that's coming out there in terms of locating infrastructure. In terms of allowing other entities to locate your infrastructure under the dedicated locator model, there's that legal requirement. So you have to provide that. If you have any issues, that's something you would have to share with us and the project owner immediately once we send out that notice. And that's what that 10-day is for. That 10 days, and they're giving you a notice that this is the chosen selected dedicated locator service provider. If you have any issues or anything in between that, then immediately notify Ontario One Call and the project owner. We can review at that point. Now, at that point, if whether or not that reason is just because you don't want any other entities to locate your infrastructure, then we have to look into that, because as a member, there's legal requirements under the new model at this point.
Yeah, but it says I get to choose and I have to sign off on them. There's, you know, you got to respect, there's NDAs, there's pricing things, we've got all kinds of agreements in place, right?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna go to some unknown locator and have them be touching my network, and liabilities and everything with it, right? So I don't know how that works. I just want to make
like
sure,
I said,
because
like I said, under the dedicated locator model, on our end here and also other members itself, there is a base level requirements and framework that we are working with the dedicated locate committee of being eligible as a dedicated locate provider. So what you're seeing, these dedicated locate service providers, they're not just a new locator coming out or own self-locating that just started a week ago. There's a base level requirements and training that they have to have set in place already, business-wise, locator-wise, training-wise. There has to be a set level. So that's one thing. In terms of MDAs and agreements and whatnot, those are things that you're going to have to work out with the dedicated locate service provider at that point, because you know that is put in place with that locator locating your infrastructure at that point. But like I said,
yeah,
under the new
Marco,
legislation,
I don't think you get it. Like, if we have to provide, and sorry, but first of all, you got all the legals, NDA, you got all the agreements, you got all the pricing you need to negotiate. Can't do that with 25, 30 locators. Plus, we have to set up some sort of system for them to get access to our network. And each one, we got to have some IT process to have our data available to them. I mean, I got to do that 30, 40 times depending on what locator comes at me. That doesn't sound right.
This is what, as all members, and this is the reason for this Q&A, this is what we all have to go through as members. It is required upon dedicated locator now under the legislation. So that's what I said. There is a legal requirement to it. You know, to start off with, to answer your question, basically straight that you cannot decline dedicated locator at this point. There's legal requirements behind that, and the only, you know, there is, if there's legitimate reason behind a choosing of a dedicated locator or a selection of that dedicated locator, that's something that we can discuss and kind of work with the project owner. But in terms of the request, if it's a valid dedicated locate service provider or a valid locate service provider that has base requirements and whatnot, there's a required that you have to agree to that dedicated locator. So that's something as you and your member, and a lot of these members in this calls are going through right now. So they're looking to process on dedicated locator itself and how to allow that third party to locate on behalf of your infrastructure there. But you got to look at it, yes, as a member side, you are opening up, you know, your records to a third party service, but you also have that agreement that you can put in place in there where there's certain NDAs that dedicated locator can sign off with. There's certain trainings that you can, you know, put onto your agreement that they have to meet in terms of standards. These are all as if you're, you know, contracting that locate service provider as a third party to locate your infrastructure, but they're just working under a dedicated locate for that project owner itself. So hence the reason why we're opening up this call as well too, just to, you know, other members that have gone through this process and have gone through, you know, obviously the agreements with dedicated locate service provider. This is an open conversation. So if you have questions on board for even other members, maybe want to share their experience based on, you know, how they're tackling this. This is what this platform of webinar is for here.
It's Paul Elvis, University of Toronto. I have 130 acres of downtown Toronto, and I just recently received dedicated locator for all of the GTA, basically, everything from Toronto to East York. I don't care about the rest of Toronto. I care about my 130 acres. Again, similar issue to the gentleman who was just speaking. I think maybe it's always been my misconception, or maybe there's a misunderstanding. We have a locator who does all our locates on our campus. And anybody who wants to dig or in the past has been working very well, goes through one call, gets 10 days notice, and our locator locates the services. Having to enter contracts or agreements and issuing information to every locator who's working anywhere in the city because they're working on a project that's DL07, I think is a problem.
You got to look at it that if you have that X amount of acres, it's the project affecting that area directly. So that's something you can come back to the project. So that's something you can come back to the project owner and kind of request a more detailed information through the work scope, whether or not it's touching or encompassing your infrastructure within that X amount of acres within City of Toronto, right? So that's something you can establish from the start of after we send out the acknowledgement. You can reach out directly to the project owner or DLSP requesting that information to say, this is where my infrastructure is. Would any work be occurring within this infrastructure? That's your first starter point, right? If there's work happening within that infrastructure, within your coverage area, then we move on to the next step. How would it look like for that dedicated locator to service that project now within your area? How much in terms of like how much locates will be coming through that area? What is the work scope, timeline, and whatnot? So from that point in, you can work out that agreement and work hand in hand with the project owner and DLSP. So if you wish to have,
wasn't that being done by one call in the past 2, 3, 4, or 5 years? Wasn't that the role of one call to identify the zones and call my locator when?
Yes, I understand that, and then that's the reason why we sent out a notification for you in this case, because within that zone, you come up as a member. So whether or not they're working within your areas, for example, like I said, Fiber to Homes, they're working within a region, right? May not be specific on the initial request, but you can request a specific of their work scope. You can provide them where your area is of your infrastructure, and then whether or not if their project is going to be affecting that that area, then that's where we can proceed to the next conversation. How would it look like to be under a dedicated locator? What you would require to comply under a dedicated locator. So I understand you have one locator that can come out and locate your infrastructure at that point. Maybe having that locator work hand in hand with the dedicated locator on those times that they have to locate within your infrastructure. So these are not black and white where a request can come through and at this point you have to hand in all your records, just let it go. You can still go back and forth and have those constructive conversations with the project owner or DLSP, including ourselves, to ensure that we can put this in place and everyone can comply to the act itself. So if you have further question regarding that, then we can certainly take this offline and have another separate call with yourself or anyone within your corporation to kind of further discuss this request. But definitely, if you have further concern, that we can take that offline here as well.
Just
Sorry,
a question. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add on to that. So technically, we shouldn't be getting DL emails if we're not in the areas, right? Like if Ontario One Call is actually going through and zoning stuff. So I'm looking at all of Peel. I shouldn't be getting stuff for Toronto.
So there's some cases where a project owner would submit a regional request. You can be a neighboring infrastructure, or you can be a neighboring boundaries based on that, and that's hence the reason why it shows up onto your notices or into our notices, because you are regional appeal, but the work is within the Toronto, so therefore automatically on our mapping system, if you're within the boundaries, you're still considered as an affected member. Now, this is where, once again, you can go back to the project owner or the DLSP. If you know for certain that they're not reaching past that regional border, then you can automatically say that my infrastructure is outside of your work scope, therefore it will not affect your project, and then you can just move on to your own way, and you don't have to go into agreements in that point. So the initial communication we sent out is just an initial communication. You may be not affected at all. You can just be
I know, but like, shouldn't it be tweaked down to what's actually affected? So if the PDF clearly states Scarborough, East York, North
Mhm.
York, whatever, all the Toronto areas,
Yeah.
and Peel's not part of that, it shouldn't trigger Peel, right? Like if they're already saying that they're not working in Peel,
Mhm.
then why would we get triggered into that? Like it's just added work in my opinion.
Yes, so there's, like I said, it's based off the mapping that's set up through Ontario One Call. So if you're mapping and the way it's set up, it's right through the border lines. The notification, unfortunately, it will include you onto the border lines itself. So there's no way we can filter that directly, especially for a regional request. So it would just have to be filtered out with the project owner once you receive that request to say that the work itself is outside your municipal boundaries itself.
In
So
that scenario as well, if you do find you're getting requests for neighboring municipalities and you don't have anything, it may be worth having a look back at your mapping coverage, because then if you're able to actually refine it and be more specific and move it off the border because you don't actually have anything there, then that also would kind of resolve that issue. And just a question from the chat here about mapping. So when it comes to the infrastructure mapping, what details do we have to provide to the dedicated locator?
good question. Basically, the way we envision it is that you would provide any sort of mapping that would require a third-party locator service provider to locate your infrastructure safely and properly. So those are the type of mapping that you require. It could be in any shape and form. This is something you can discuss with the DLSP in terms of what mapping you have in availability or what kind of format it is on. Is that format that is, they can have capability to access. Um, Once again, that could be through the agreement that could be set in place with the dedicated local service provider. But as a member, you got to just envision it that, do you feel comfortable enough with your current mapping to provide to a third party locate service provider to complete your locate safely and properly, right? That's how you can determine that if your mapping is sufficient enough at that point.
Oh, I have a question for you. If you're showing there's more and more members being added to this all the time, at what point does this become no different than regular locates?
Well, we envision this with dedicated locator in terms of number wise, we envision it to pretty much even out with the same as what public load would be. The way what we're seeing right now is that the public load, there's a lot of large entities or large scale projects that are bogging out the system itself. With dedicated locator coming through on hand, we are separating that with large high demand projects to a dedicated locator where they're providing their own resources versus the public load now is relieving that strain. So the public load is really just for the public load itself. So in terms of that, we envision it to be 50-50 even in that case, because a lot of locates that's coming through right now, it's half of it are large scale projects that are being called consistently every 2 or 3 weeks for relocates or locates. Then the demands are there. With dedicated locator, that will take that out of the public system. So yes, there's more involvements in terms of members. It's to a point, the public load is just going to be made for public. So the homeowners, the fencings and whatnot, those are the legitimate public locate loads that members would deal with, whereas major projects would be under dedicated locator because it's more efficient at that point. In our group here, we still have Christine with her hands up. Christine Goodale.
Yes, hi, Christine from Blue Mountain Resort. Just wanted sort of very laid out the steps I need to take when I receive a dedicated locator project acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm.
What do I have to do?
So with these steps, and this is where the second session will be very beneficial because we're going to go more in depth with that. Basically, but a quick overview of that. Once you receive the project acknowledgement from ourselves here, where we provide the notice as well too of the attached request that came from the project owner. Your initial request is having that open conversation to start off with. So whether or not the DLSP will reach over to you already right after we send that over, or the project owner reach over to you, or vice versa, you can initiate that conversation already that, okay, we agree with the dedicated locate service provider that is indicated of this project. This is what we require, or have those conversations start off with. So that is your base requirement, really. and then that's your start off. Once you have those communications set up to start off with, that somewhat complies already within the 10 business days that's required as per the act, because you're already opening up the conversation. Now, whether or not what that timeline looks like afterwards, that's something that's between the DLSP and yourself to work out with, to how long would it take for them to obtain the standards, the mapping, the training you may require as a member for them to safely locate your infrastructure. As long as all parties involved, project owner, DLSP, and yourself, meet on an alternative timeline, then that's something that could be through an email where there can be an alternative timeline past the 10 days, if that's the case.
Okay, thank you.
No problem, Christine.
Just when I do reply, am I contacting the project owner and the dedicated locator service provider, or just the
So
DSLP?
in most cases, when we send out that notice, the project owner and the DLSP are copied onto the email. So you can actually just hit reply all.
Just reply all, okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
and it will send out the notice to both parties. And then in most cases, what we are currently seeing is that the DLSP will be the one reaching over to you, because they're the one that has to obtain the mapping at this point. So as long as you're in agreement with the dedicated local service provider, then that's, you can work directly with them. Just like on the previous question on the start of this, if there's a conflict of the use of the service provider at this point, the DLSP, then we would have to be notified, and the project owner would have to be notified immediately, so that way we can work within the timeline, to resolve the concern at that point.
okay, thank you.
No problem.
I just want to say as well, we encourage you to ensure that you're copying DL at OntarioOneCall.ca on any of these reach outs as well. If you're not getting a response from a project owner, or if something's unclear, please reach out to us. We've got a staff here, and also we encourage you to keep us copied on those emails, so then if there is an issue with a timeline, we've got a record, right? And we can see whomever had reached out on this day asking about this didn't get a reply back, anything like that. But please feel free to keep us copied on these communications, and it'll I think it'll help everyone, really.
Yeah. So we have about 3 minutes remaining to this webinar. So just a reminder again, for those who have signed up or have not signed up for the May 10th in-depth session of the process of dedicated locator, please do so, or just send us an email we can resend you a link to the sign up for the next session here on May 10th. And then from there, we will proactively have this Q&A session on a monthly basis. Once again, our goal here is to get all members together, kind of share their experiences, share their concerns, work hand in hand between each member. So it's not just us speaking with you guys directly. We want members to speak with one another, to share their experiences and go through this and successfully roll out dedicated locator model. As per Brandon there, our team is here. We left our information in front of you. So our deal at OntarioOneCall.ca. Give us a shout. We can always set up a call on the side with you if you require any further information as well too.
And just one more question here in the question window before we head out. So they're just asking, I think as members, we're hoping for the same thing. These notices should include more information, for example, scope of work and mapping.
Yes, so with that question, we did something where we are proactively working with project owners of submissions, ensuring we can get the most information that we could possibly get in terms of those submissions. But once again, if those information is not there to start off with, or if you require further information, it doesn't limit the member to reach out to the project owner or the DLSP to obtain those information at that point, to get more in terms of seeing what the type of work that's occurring at that point, or where the work area is, so that way you can better proceed to how you can work with the dedicated locator service provider at that point.
I'm not even sure how these dedicated locator project owners, how can they even be approved for a project without a scope of work or maps before contacting any members?
So with that being said, it's the project owner, they have a big project on hand. So sort of say, let's say fiber to home, they have a overall region that they have a big project scope to, where exactly the plan out, they may have the full detailed information there, but unable to attach that onto the form. And hence the reason why you can reach over to them directly to obtain those type of information. They might not just be able to attach it directly on the form that we are provided, but if you require more information, you can obtain that to the project owner or the DLSP to to see in the work scope itself and the exact mapping itself. So the methodology of their work, of what they're doing, are they doing directional drillings and whatnot? So we are proactively advising project owners to include as much as possible they can. If it's missing from that point, or if as a member, if you want to gather more information or you need to require more information, it doesn't limit you from contacting them directly. Once again, there has to be a form of communication between the member, the DLSP, or the project owner after we send out the acknowledgement format, right? Okay, these are all great questions for this afternoon. I just want to thank everyone for their time here. I look forward to seeing you guys all again on May 10th. There is obviously quite a great interest of and questions that we have come across here today. If we have not reached over to your, to answer any of your questions here, feel free to reach over to us. So we'll cover that over to our next session here. Reach over to us if you require the registration link again for the May 10th session. But aside from that, thank you again for everyone attending this session. We look forward from hearing back from you and hope for a success of dedicated locator rollout here. Thank you, everyone.